Hi, friends. Thanks so much for joining us on the very first virtual Family Sunday with Delaware Shakespeare. I'm Cassie, and this is my friend Emily.
Hi, how's it going, everyone?
We're very excited to share a story with you today. We're going to be reading a book called Will's Quill, or How a Goose Saved Shakespeare by Don Freeman. I think it's going to be exciting. Emily, would you like to tell us a little bit about quills? That's not a word that is very familiar to us in 2020.
It's an old word because a quill is an old pen. It's the original pen. A quill is a feather.
Wait,
People used
like a
before we
feather?
had pens,
Like this peacock
like
feather?
that feather exactly.
No way!
Before we had pens, they would use quills. They would take feathers from birds, and then they would dip the feathers in ink and write with them.
Your hand must get really tired. That sounds like a lot of work, dipping and writing.
Dipping and then writing and then dipping and then writing. Thank goodness we have ink that just pours out of our pen now.
Have you ever written with a quill, Emily?
I haven't, but what's really cool is you can make your own quill. I don't have a feather like you do. If you don't have a feather at home, you can print out a quill template.
Ooh.
So what you'll do is you'll cut along the dotted lines, and then you'll fold it in the center, and you'll tape it to a pen.
Oh, that's so clever.
And if you're really feeling special, you can draw all over it and make it a fun, dazzly feather.
It's so fancy. That's really excellent. Well, thank you for creating a quill, Emily. Would you like to read a book with me?
I would love to. Let's hear Will's quill.
Wonderful. Let's do it. Many long years ago, in merry old England, there lived a country goose named Willoughby Waddle. While the other geese on the farm were content to spend their days nibbling on flowers and floating lazily on the lake, Willoughby was restless. He wanted to see the world, but even more, he wanted to be useful. And so early one spring morning, he set out for London town. There's Willoughby on a grand adventure.
Wow. I love the watercolors.
Isn't that beautiful? London is a big place for a small goose to go, all alone. Once inside the gates of the great city, Willoughby was startled to see so many people rushing helter-skelter through the narrow cobblestone streets.
Cobblestones?
Cobblestones!
Do you know what cobblestones are, Cassie?
I've heard of them before. Could you tell me what they are?
They're like, just like a quill is an old-fashioned pen, a cobblestone is an old-fashioned street.
Ooh.
It was a street made of stones.
It must be a little bit more bumpy than the streets we have today. It's made of stones.
They are. Most certainly.
Bumpy old streets and feather pens. Sounds more exciting to me. It was all he could do to keep from being trampled underfoot or crushed by the wheels of passing carts and carriages. Look how busy those streets are.
Wow.
Can you spot Willoughby?
I see a carriage,
Ooh.
and just below the carriage, I see a little goose.
The carriage
looks like a market.
Fancy. Mm-hmm. For a sensitive goose who was used to the quiet countryside, the raucous cries of peddlers hawking their wares were frightening. There are a lot of big words in that sentence, Emily.
I heard raucous, I heard wares, and I heard, what was that other weird one?
Hawking.
Hawking. Like a bird?
Like a bird, but a verb.
I looked this up. This is a very interesting, another old-fashioned word. Hawking their wares is like selling your items very loudly in the street.
which would also be then raucous cries.
Very loud and boisterous. Boisterous is another big word, maybe too big.
It's a big
Just very loud noises.
Loud noises. Let's read that sentence again, thinking about this sensitive country goose who is now in the midst of all this chaos. For a sensitive goose who is used to the quiet countryside, the raucous cries of peddlers hawking their wares were frightening. Aw, thanks, Emily, I get it now. Come buy my pots and pans, shouted one crier. Ink, ink, called out another. Who will buy my fine writing quills and ink? We know what that word is. Look at all his fancy feathers.
Those are some fun, fancy pants, too.
They really are.
I see the man hawking his wares, too. He's going like this.
What an exciting time to be a salesman. A stout woman walked by carrying a cage with 2 scrawny geese trapped inside. When she saw Willoughby, she yelled, "Come, my pretty, I could use a plump goose the likes of thee." Willoughby was terrified, but not so terrified he couldn't escape her grasp. Look at that.
Poor Willoughby. She's got some other Willoughbys in her cage, too.
They look pretty sad to me. I'm glad he's a fast goose. He was beginning to understand why city geese looked so weak and downtrodden. Willoughby hid inside an empty barrel and tried to smooth out his ruffled feathers. Aww. If only he could survive this first day in London town, he knew he would find some way of being useful. Do you see Willoughby there in his barrel? He looks rather cozy, doesn't he?
I see the cobblestone streets, too.
Mm-hmm. There they are. I think he'll survive this first day in London town. He's going to figure it out.
He'll be just fine.
Mm-hmm. Just when he felt it was safe for him to venture forth again, swash! Down from a window came a torrent of dishwater and bits of discarded vegetables. Willoughby was covered from the top of his head to the tip of his tail feathers. He had just learned that it was common practice for Londoners to empty their dishpans into the streets below. Oh no!
It's the one thing I'm grateful for. We have trash cans today, and we have sewage systems today.
Look at poor Willoughby, covered in water and vegetables.
Poor Willoughby.
And while he stood there, trying to recover from this latest indignity, a bearded young gentleman happened by. Indignity, was that a word that you happened to look up, Emily?
It was. Indignity. Can you read the sentence one more time, please?
And while he stood there, trying to recover from this latest indignity, a bearded young man came by.
Indignity is someone insulting your dignity and bringing you down.
Like throwing a bunch of water and vegetable scraps on your head?
Yeah, he was probably a little embarrassed by that.
I think I would be too.
I would be too.
The young gentleman stopped, and he spoke to Willoughby. "Allow me to assist thee," he said, brushing the cabbage leaves from Willoughby's wings. "Forsooth, it does seem that life is full of woe, even for a lowly goose. Aww. What a nice young man."
Wow. Willoughby found a friend.
He does. He has a friend. The gentleman then reached into a leather pouch and brought out a fistful of ripe berries, which he held in his cupped hand. "Here, my friend," he said, "thy need is greater than mine." Oh, how kind.
Oh, wow.
What kind of red berries do you imagine they were, Emily?
Probably raspberries.
That's what they are in my head.
I
I think Willoughby finds them pretty tasty. Never had Willoughby been treated with such kindness. Then and there he vowed that somehow, in some way, he would be of use to this thoughtful man. So when the gentleman quickly walked away, Willoughby did his best to follow. But to his dismay, he soon lost sight of his friend.
Oh no, he's lost in the street again.
It is hard to keep up with people when you're not sure your way around.
And when you're a goose.
That's true. His legs aren't quite as long.
No, he's much shorter.
Willoughby found himself standing before the Globe, the most famous theatre in all of London, where every afternoon people came to see plays performed. Could his friend have disappeared into this huge round building?
Whoa, I don't see buildings like that today.
Isn't it fabulous?
It's very special.
Now, all of the people around look very fancy, don't they?
They do. You know, I've been to London and it's still the same shape today.
Isn't that exciting?
Pretty cool.
Some good things don't change. Before he could decide what to do next, he was swept inside the theater by the onrushing crowd of latecomers. With much effort, Willoughby squeezed in and out of between the people's legs.
Where is he? Do you see Willoughby? Oh, I see
Can you
him.
spot him? He's hiding. It's a crowded theater for such a small goose. He finally managed to ease his way up to the front near the stage where he could better see the people's faces. The audience was growing more and more excited. Ah, now comes the dueling scene, said a portly gentleman standing next to Willoughby. A portly gentleman? Emily, do you know what that word means?
Portly is a little bit rounder.
Oh, a round gentleman. 'Tis the best part of the play.
Let's see if we can see a portly gentleman.
See him?
Yeah, he's the one whispering, I think.
Ooh, I think you're right. Excited about dueling.
Wow.
Two men, brandishing long, sharp swords, began leaping about, chasing each other around the stage. Willoughby looked up. He recognized the dueler dressed in bright red. It was the very man who had befriended him earlier. Of course, Willoughby didn't know anything about play acting, and when he saw that his friend was in trouble, he became alarmed. This was his chance to return the favor. Do you see the actors dueling?
Yeah, I wonder what Willoughby's going to
I
do.
wonder. He doesn't know that they're just using prop swords, right? Actors don't use sharp swords. They
That
use
would be
props.
dangerous.
It's just play pretend, but how is a goose to know? Willoughby flew up on the stage and nipped the other dueler by the seat of his breeches. "Gadzooks," the man cried, "I've been bit by a wild goose."
Willoughby!
I think that would
If
hurt.
a goose did that to me, I would not be happy.
No, I think it would hurt.
Wow.
The audience burst into gales of laughter. They hooted and they howled. Then one ruffian shouted, "'Tis foul play," which was indeed very rude. The actors tried to go on with their duel, but it was no use. Besides, now everyone had begun to leave the theater.
It looks like a party now.
It really does. They look like they've just seen the best play of their lives.
I love when silly things happen on stage.
That's part of the magic, right? That's why you go to the theater. When he saw the terrible commotion, Willoughby sensed that he had done something wrong. He fled outside as fast as he could. Any other goose would have given up and gone far away, but not Willoughby. He ran and hid behind a tree to wait for his friend. Would he be angry? When at last the actors came out of the stage door, they seemed in a most jovial mood. Did you look up that word by any chance, Emily?
I did.
Jovial
Do you know what
is a big
jovial
one.
means?
What does
It just
jovial
means
mean?
happy.
Oh, I'll read that sentence again. When at last the actors came out of the stage door, they seemed in a most jovial mood. So it looks like they aren't very mad at Willoughby. Even the two duellers shook hands. "Methinks that intruding goose was the best part of a poor play," said one of the actors, and everyone else agreed. There's Willoughby.
What a cute goose.
What a cute goose. They weren't cross with him at all. "Pray, write us a good play, Will," pleaded a fellow actor. "We have great need of poetic lines to speak, and thou art the only writer who sings from the heart." "I can but try," replied the young man called Will. "This very night I intend to finish the play I have been working on for lo these many moons. I shall see thee all anon." So Willoughby's friend is Will.
Wow.
And Will likes to write plays.
I was going to say, it looks like it's sunset.
Oh, it does. They've had a long day at the theater.
Yes.
Once again, Willoughby followed his friend Will. Through one dark street after another they went, until Will came to his house, stepped inside, and closed the door after him. For more than an hour, Willoughby waited in the moonlit street. Finally, just as he was about to waddle away to find a place to sleep, the shutters of a window opened wide. Willoughby looked up and saw his friend throwing several feathers down into the street. "Curse these quills," he was grumbling. "How can I write with such wretched pens?"
There's that word again.
There's that word!
Quill.
He's
Look at all those quills coming down.
throwing all of them away. Naturally, Willoughby was curious. He went over to inspect the feathers and found that each of their inky tips was badly broken. So he must have been dipping them in ink, just like you said.
And he's such a big writer, he writes all the time. His quills were probably breaking.
Probably breaking. He needs a really strong one. Willoughby immediately knew what was wrong. These pitiful-looking quills had come from city geese. Oh. Emily, do you remember the city geese we met earlier?
Yeah, I do. The ones in the cages.
I think maybe their feathers aren't very strong.
Probably because they're maybe not that happy.
They're maybe not
because they're
that
kept in
happy.
cages.
And they're not running about in the countryside.
And they're not going to see plays.
They're not going to see plays. Everyone should see plays. Willoughby stuck his head under his wing and plucked forth one long, strong feather.
Oh, what a good friend.
What a good friend. I think that would hurt to pluck out a feather, though. Like ripping off a Band-Aid. Ouch.
Although sometimes when they rustle their feathers, the feathers just come loose.
That's
Maybe
true.
he had a loose one.
He had a loose one. He just shimmied it off.
Yeah.
With his beak, he tapped on the door, not once, but many times. At last the door opened. "How now, my faithful goose?" Will exclaimed. "What is thy pleasure?" Then, holding up his lantern, he said, "Ah, now I see. Thou art offering me a quill of thine own."
That word again.
There it is.
Whoa, I
Willoughby's holding
see
his
it.
quill. And Will has a lantern. Emily, what's a lantern?
It's an old-fashioned light.
Ooh,
This book is full of old-fashioned words.
it truly is.
Love it.
"'Tis the answer to my greatest need," said Will, lifting Willoughby up in his arms and carrying him into his garret room. "Come, be my guest." What a nice man. Can you see his writing desk?
I can. It's got another little lantern on it.
Yes, it's all ready.
Although that's more like a candlestick, actually.
Oh, that's true.
You have the candlestick over there at the desk, and the lantern is on his table.
Ooh.
Mm.
He needs good light to be able to write things down. He gently took the feather from Willoughby's beak and then set about sharpening the quill to a very fine point. Will sat down at his desk and began to write, while Willoughby settled happily in a cozy corner and fell into a peaceful sleep. Throughout the long night, the playwright filled one page after another. He was inspired.
See what happens when you get a good pen?
Mm-hmm.
It can make or break your writing experience.
This is true. The creativity is just flowing for Will. And do you see little Willoughby here?
Oh, he's so cute.
He's tired after his big day in the city.
Yeah.
When the rays of the morning sun beamed through the window, Will stood up and sighed. 'Tis done. With a flourish of his new quill, he signed his name, William Shakespeare. Then, turning to Willoughby, he said, "Without thee, dear goose, my play might never have been writ." There they are.
Wow.
I like this picture. It looks like they're doing the same pose.
It
Their
does.
arms out or their wings. We're celebrating a new play. Willoughby Waddle had indeed become a most useful goose. And from that day forward, he and his friend Will made their way to the Globe Theatre together, delighting the people of London town and filling their hearts with pride. Oh,
Wow.
there they are.
Look at that dress and that other man's outfit.
So fancy. And back to the Globe with a new play. What an exciting day.
Never knew William Shakespeare had a pet goose.
Things we are so glad to have learned. Emily, thank you for reading a story with me and for showing us how to make a quill.
Of course. Thanks for reading the story to me. I really enjoyed it.
This was so fun. And thank you so much, friends, for joining us. We will be back next Sunday with another story for you. And in the meantime, we hope you take very good care